Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Token City Show. Today we have with us a real powerhouse. Her name is Amanda Wick. Amanda is a former federal prosecutor for the U.S. Department of Justice, specialized in money laundering and cryptocurrency. After working at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, she left government to serve as the chief of legal affairs at Chainalysis, a leading blockchain analytics company. She briefly returned to the government service when she was asked to lead the financial investigation for the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. She is now the founder and chief executive officer of the Women in Cryptocurrency Association, which advocates for the equal inclusion of women in the future of digital finance. She is also a principal with Incite Consulting, providing expert and litigation advisory services to cryptocurrency businesses. Hello, Amanda, and welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
You are very welcome. Let's go with the first question. Drawing from your unique background in federal prosecution and your focus on money laundering and cryptocurrency, how do you see the landscape of cyber law enforcement evolving with the rise of asset tokenization in traditional finance, and also at the intersection with crypto and DeFi?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I frankly am a little worried because the explosion of tokenization and the introduction of this technology is moving much faster than law enforcement's capability to learn it and learn how to trace it. And in some of the United States federal agencies, we've seen that capacity grow over the years, but in foreign countries and in what's called state and local law enforcement throughout the United States, that capacity isn't there yet, and we need it desperately. There are really great things about this technology, and unfortunately, bad actors can use it for bad things. And we need law enforcement to be able to respond to that in the countries where it's happening. So I'm hoping that there are law enforcement capacity efforts going on to improve that. One of those is Operation Shamrock, being led by Aaron West out of California, a global initiative to work with law enforcement. But we need way more law enforcement around the world to be learning about this technology, because it's the future of digital finance. Illicit finance will be there just like regular finance, but we need massive education, tools, technology, resources, training, and it's just not where it should be for how prolific this technology is.
All right, so would you say then that it's a matter of mainly resources and education, as you, like, is that the main challenge?
I think it is the main challenge. I think there's also an issue that some jurisdictions are still treating this like it's a fad that might go away. I'd like to think that most of them aren't there. Some of them have, mistakenly tried to ban it, which is a terrible solution. And in the countries that they did that, it didn't work. So hopefully more countries will dedicate resources to training and capacity building. But yes, 100%, I do think that resources and education are the largest part of the problem.
Okay, and curious to know what type of illegal activity would you highlight as the most prevalent and or the most dangerous?
Yeah, so there's actually a type of crime that's terribly named, but it's a translation of what Chinese criminals named it, which is called pig butchering. And it's a form of a romance scam mixed with different types of scams that have existed before. But what's really problematic about it is that they spend a lot of time working with people, oftentimes over weeks, if not months. And then the amounts that they steal are life ruining. So we're seeing victims who lose 6-7 figures, entire life savings. Some victims have committed suicide. Their families' entire generational wealth is lost. And the really horrible part is that many of the people who are committing these crimes that are located in Cambodia and Myanmar are actually victims themselves who are being trafficked from other countries like Thailand or Singapore, where they're lured with the offer of a job. Then they're captured, kept in these camps, and forced to defraud others. And it is a massive transnational organized crime problem that we have not been addressing sufficiently. And folks know where the camps are. You can see them in satellite imagery, but we have not been able to get the governments in those countries to crack down and stop this in any meaningful way. And countries like Australia, the United States, Canada are being absolutely just horrifically impacted by the number of scams.
Wow, yeah. To be honest, I had never, I mean, I had seen some light headline about something like this, but I would never have thought that it's like a massive issue. Can we infer by your answer that terrorism has been properly tackled in terms of terrorism financing in this space?
Yeah, so this is actually somewhere where the news does a little bit of a disservice. Blockchain analytics companies that look at these rates have found that very little of this funding is actually going to terrorist financing. Now, some of the transnational organized crime groups that are committing these crimes are likely connected to terrorist groups, but realistically, you're talking about just run-of-the-mill money laundering that's committed as the result of these crimes. So you have a bunch of illicit proceeds, and maybe it's going to continue the crimes, maybe it's going to pay for the facilities they need, maybe there's connections to terrorist financing, but the amount of illicit finance, when we're using that term, the amount that's just dirty money from drug sales, human trafficking, scams, et cetera, compared to how much actually goes into terrorist financing in crypto, the evidence is actually that it's quite small. There are some terrorist financing groups that are moving into crypto more quickly, but realistically, many of them are still using traditional methods, traditional finance, state-sponsored funding. So the fear surrounding crypto and terrorist financing doesn't equal the amount of money in terrorist financing. The lack of fear of how much crypto is in pig butchering and scams is unfortunate because there is a ton of money that is being stolen. And so we need more people to be worried about the money laundering and the illicit finance from the scams and just regular money laundering. But terrorist financing gets all the press, gets all the clicks, and there's an outsized focus on that when the damage that's being done to millions of people from scams is frankly far greater than the damage being done to anyone from actual terrorist actions that have been funded by crypto, which are minimal.
Okay. Understood. Now, going into the second question, I'd like you to reflect on your experience not only at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, but also at the Chainalysis. We've talked about some challenges. Maybe you would like to add some more, but also the opportunities that you see with this new technology, or maybe others, to identify illicit and trace and identify illicit activities within the blockchain space. And also, as a follow-up, how do you see these potential challenges and opportunities? How could they be approached to increase the adoption of asset tokenization?
Yeah, so those are two really good questions combined. Let me start with the first one. I think people don't realize the opportunities in crypto given blockchain analytics. So I was a financial investigator, a financial prosecutor for nearly a decade. And when I go to investigate somebody and I serve what's called a subpoena in the United States on a bank, that's a very difficult way to get information. And also my visibility into the bank is completely dependent on the bank's internal ledger because all of their information is kept inside and I can't see anything that a traditional financial institution is doing from the outside unless I serve them with legal process and say, give me this information. When we would show people what you could see with crypto, where you can use blockchain analytics tools to see, well, this money came from a dark net, this money came from scams, this money came from DeFi, this money came from ransomware, from the visibility at the transactional level of what's touching illicit finance or what's likely the proceeds of crime is so incredible that if what you're looking for is illicit finance, it's just easier in many ways in crypto. Now, crypto comes with its own difficulties because the speed at which it moves and seizure, and there's pluses and minuses to everything. But law enforcement has an immense ability to see. What we really need to work on is their ability to move quickly, which goes back to the resources and training. And also, most countries don't have the legal frameworks necessary to actually seize dirty money when they find it. So if you're a victim of a scam and we find your money at an exchange, many countries can only freeze the funds. They can't seize them unless they prosecute a criminal. And if a criminal is in a country where they can't be extradited, you're not getting that victim's money back. So the Financial Action Task Force, which is a global body that advocates for standards in anti-money laundering, recently passed a recommendation suggesting to countries that they get what's called non-conviction based confiscation schemes, which is basically the ability to get money back for victims without necessarily having to criminally charge somebody. And that, I'm hoping, will be a massive opportunity for countries to get compliant. And I think when we start to see the ability for people to react to this technology and adapt, I think you'll start to see the understanding from people that tokenization of assets is just the future of digital finance. The same way we went from paper checks to mobile checks, the same way we went to virtual cards. This is literally just the future technology of money. The problem is that the technology has moved so fast, and our capability to trace it, seize it, get it back for victims is not anywhere near that. So we just have to catch up. But I think so many of us see the potential for the technology. We just need the regulatory frameworks and law enforcement to catch up, so that there's not a huge inequality between a criminal's ability to take advantage of the system and law enforcement's ability to catch the bad actors and leave the technology for the good ones.
The technology allows for so much for good, but also bad. And regulators need to do catching up in both sides. Yeah. So let's switch to your association for women in cryptocurrency. You are the founder and CEO, and thus you are at the forefront of advocating for equal inclusion in digital finance. How do you believe diversity within the sector can influence the development and governance of tokenized assets on DeFi platforms?
Yeah, well, look, we talk about this all the time, is that for a number of reasons, initially crypto was kind of a bro culture. And unfortunately, there's still some of that today. The reality is that there's thousands of women working in this industry, doing amazing things, founding companies, being CEO, lawyers, compliance. Our association is over 460 members in 26 countries, I believe. And this is a global network of women and allies. I want to emphasize that we are very welcoming to anyone, male, female, non-binary, anyone who believes in advocating for the equal inclusion of women to ensure that the future of digital finance is built including women. And the reason that's so important isn't just for the value of the women and their careers, and it's because you can't have global adoption of a technology if it's only being built by 50%, if it's only being used by 50%. If you exclude women from this, if you don't listen to their voices, if you don't include them in the process, then you're building a product based on the viewpoints of not as many people as you should. And one of the things I love about this industry is that so many people left traditional finance, left the government. We saw the ability to fix a broken system, whether it was finance or government. We saw in digital assets, in tokenization, in crypto, whatever your flavor is, we see a future where we can actually fix many of the things that a lot of people were unwilling to admit were broken. And in this community of fixers, having the conversation about building inclusion in at layer zero, if you will, is so much easier in some ways to say, look, if we're building better, let's just build inclusion in a way that traditional finance didn't. in a way that women were left behind and had to claw and fight for years. And we don't want to do that with digital finance. We want this to be the solution to problems, not creating more problems. And I find that a lot of folks in the industry, because they're already in that let's fix things and make things better mindset, are very willing to have the discussion about, then let's have inclusion, especially when it comes to women, be a part of the discussion.
That he was basically started a program on the same vein, and he said, women were, well, curious, but as soon as they started, this was for coding, for development roles and such, and as soon as they started learning a little bit, suddenly the interest picked up and the rate of success was enormous. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to this type of initiative. And now, just to a change of pace or subject, for new entrants in the traditional finance and tokenization space, regulatory compliance is a major challenge, as we know here at Token City. So I wanted to ask you, if we picture a magical regulatory bullet, silver bullet that enables the protection of investors and consumers without stifling innovation and entrepreneurship, in your opinion, what would that look like in practical terms?
Yeah, so I love this question, especially because I briefly detailed at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. And one of the things they look at is the implementation of what's called the Bank Secrecy Act in the United States, ironically named because it was, supposed to make it not secret. But when we look at our anti-money laundering framework, especially in the United States, it's a statute that was passed in 1970 for cash. And I think one of the real problems that we have, and we talk about this at so many conferences with regulators and in the policy space, we're trying to shove a round peg into a very square hole, and it's really problematic. And the problem is that many regulators around the world weren't moving as quickly in terms of education and understanding the technology. Many of them thought it was a fad that would disappear, but the technology has now moved so fast and it's so complex that we spend a lot of our time educating regulators for kind of what to do now and how to basically kind of cover the now, when realistically, we need to be talking about what should the Bank Secrecy Act look like for 2030. And if you look at how crypto works and the technology of it, we need to have a better proposal than just shoving crypto into the existing AML frameworks that existed for traditional finance. And you'll hear sometimes in policy circles, folks will say, same risk, same activity, same rule. And it's a little naive and wrong because crypto isn't the same. Crypto has certain aspects of it that are similar to traditional finance, like the movement of value. But in other ways, crypto is wildly different. The speed, the technological aspect of it, the decentralization, and to try to treat it the same doesn't acknowledge that you need to accommodate certain aspects of it. So I think until we see regulatory innovation the same way that we've seen financial innovation, we're really going to struggle because people are basically trying to put gas into a Fred Flintstone car. And when you have very incompatible technologies, the regulatory framework that you're going to come up with and the regulatory problems there are just going to grow. I think you see some jurisdictions like Singapore, Dubai, Japan, some jurisdictions are taking at Europe with MiCA, they're taking this position, well, let's put in little tiny guardrails or guardrails. And if we need to move them up or adjust them, we can always do that later, but we need to put in some kind of guardrails. Sadly, you see jurisdictions like mine in the United States where they're not putting in any guardrails and people don't want to build because they don't want to go off the side of a cliff. And if you don't have any guardrails because you're just arguing over what should go up, that's a problem, and innovation will leave and go to jurisdictions where regulation is more predictable. So I think we have a problem that until people start really digging into the technology and proposing regulations that look to the future and how do we basically adapt to this massive evolution, you're going to see I think, a massive shift in the financial world order, because old governments that move slowly aren't going to be able to compete with the Singapores, the UAEs, and these smaller, more nimble governments that are able to make a very welcoming environment for what's essentially the future of money.
I'm curious, in policy forums, when you mention that actually, maybe you cannot apply the same rule to Bitcoin that maybe applies to cash, what is generally the response when you say this?
I think it's the same kind of response that we call ostriches, when they kind of like bury their heads in the sand and just hope that everything kind of passes. And I think that was one of the frustrating things that I experienced when I worked in the US government, is that there are many people, we call them career workers in the United States. These are the non-political people that just work in the government, and they do their jobs, they care about the mission, and unfortunately, they suggest things, they want to fix things, and it reaches a point where there's no political will to actually effectuate change. And in the United States, part of the problem we have is that we tend not to fix things or change things until a crisis event happens. So we had the Bank Secrecy Act in 1970, but you didn't actually see enforcement of it until 9/11 happened. And then in 2001, we had the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act is a really good example of what happens when you are not ready and you are not prepared, and all of a sudden you have to put laws in place to effectuate something. And what many of us in the policy world are afraid of is that one mass terrorist event, whether it's domestic or international for the United States, because domestic terrorism, sadly, is probably our bigger threat right now, but one of those events funded by DeFi, and all of a sudden you'll see a knee-jerk reaction. This is what Senator Elizabeth Warren tried to do, unfortunately, with the October incident, where bad reporting suggested that terrorist financing in crypto was involved with the Hamas attack, and she tried to use that as a platform to get some legislation through, which didn't work. But a worse event, you just never know. So it's one of those things where we ask regulators to be more creative. Some jurisdictions are very open to the conversation. We were at Japan FinTech Week, and what JFSA is doing, what MOS in Singapore is doing, what VARA in UAE is doing, what FCA in the UK, what they're doing in Europe. Like, you just see some jurisdictions that are very open to having that conversation. And I think that's where traditional governments that aren't as open, who just assume that you can just rest on your laurels and stay in power, we now have a competition for the new financial world order. And I don't know that the US stays on top. I am very concerned about the loss of dollar dominance, which is what it is. Empires rise and fall. But I think many of us looking at this space are looking at it saying, I don't think people understand how different the world could look in 10 years if the US dollar is not the primary global reserve currency, and a basket full of currencies are in fact being used. And that's a very different world to live in.
For Americans and for Europeans, that's for sure. So now for our last question. So given your comprehensive career spanning government and private sectors in cybersecurity and law enforcement, related always to cryptocurrency and blockchain, so what future developments in asset tokenization do you find most exciting or promising for the broader financial ecosystem?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think tokenization is improving processes. And the thing about it is that if we allow that to happen, it could be great. There's a really good book that was written called Recoding America, and it was literally about how much we could improve if we were to just use basic data science to improve some of the really inefficient processes that we have in the United States. But I think the thing that I'm most excited about is, and I know this sounds weird coming from an American, but having traveled abroad extensively for the last year, because our association did, I think, 50 events in 12 countries or something. But there's something to be said about tokenization giving many countries the opportunity to have a say in a way that previously they didn't, in the sense that you've had America, China, Russia, the idea that these three dominant players are somehow going to decide everything for the world. And there are several countries, many countries, I think, that didn't always agree with US foreign policy, but felt that they had to follow along because they were on the US dollar, and the US set the tone because of its control of the global reserve currency. I don't know who some of these countries will be, or who they could be, or what their countries could be if they had more autonomy over that. And I think the thing that I'm excited about tokenization is you see people in these countries saying, well, we could build this and we could do this, and we don't have to follow America, and we don't have to follow the UK, and maybe we're the leaders. And there's an egalitarianness to that, and a meritocracy to that, that I think wouldn't be a bad thing. It'll be different, and it'll be change, and a lot of people are afraid of change, and it is terrifying. But maybe it's time for a bunch of countries to be able to have a say in their future. And I think tokenization, crypto, blockchain, digital currencies, I think all of this opens the door to the last missing puzzle piece of globalization, which wasn't just communications and digital file sharing, but the movement of asset value, and the ability to control that is incredibly freeing, liberating, and empowering. And I kind of like the idea of some countries that weren't free, weren't liberated, and weren't empowered, having a more salient say in their future, and seeing what they're able to do if they're given a chance.
Along those lines, it seems, I don't know, but I have the impression that cross-border asset transfer might be one of the last pieces of the puzzle. Is that impression correct? What do you think about that?
I think that's a huge one, because I think that's an area where traditional finance knows it has lost, in the sense that you can't put a 100-year-old steam engine on a bullet train's rails. So when you look at financial institutions that have very antiquated systems, and then you look at companies like Ripple, and you look at Circle and what stablecoins are doing, you can see the future of cross-border payments, where they've taken payments and settlements from T+3, in some instances T+6, to T0 and atomic settlement. And I think there's this tendency to sometimes pretend that crypto and TradFi can be very kumbaya, but cross-border payments is the area where it is very clear that crypto blows TradFi out of the water. And to your point, you're right. I just think cross-border payments is a use case where it's impossible to pretend that crypto is just a Ponzi scheme, that there's no use case or there's no utility. It took cross-border payments and basically electrified them. Even FedNow, the system that we've had, that I think they've been building for a decade, isn't as fast as crypto. So they spent 10 years building something that, when they got it up and running, doesn't compare with the speed of crypto. That's a very difficult thing to argue with.
Agreed. Yeah. Let's just hope that the regulation is there, which is the main issue. So we have arrived to the end of the interview. I'd like to give you now a space to just tell us whatever you want to tell us. Of course, what you're doing now, where people can find you, whatever you want.
Yeah, well, I would love if there's women or allies out there who would like to learn more about the association. Our website is www.womenincrypto.org. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Amanda Wick. Would love to hear from you, answer your questions. We're really trying to build a presence in Latin America, and we're looking for especially women leaders who want to build a group. And I will tell you, we have two strict rules. The first one is no mean girls, or mujeres malas, if you will. And the second one is male, female, non-binary. We are welcoming to everyone, so long as you're okay with our militant advocacy to fight for equal inclusion of women. And if that's something that interests you, we would love to have you. Please reach out and connect with me. And I just want to say muchísimas gracias for having me on the show. Mi español es muy básico, pero necesito practicar.
Sounds great. It's a great accent. And Amanda, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. This has been a blast. I hope we can have you at another time in the future. Congratulations for your awesome career and what you're doing right now. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And anytime, I'd love to come back. Thanks again.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So this was Amanda Wick, founder and CEO of the Women in Cryptocurrency Association. Please don't forget to check out the new Token City Club if you want to learn everything about tokenization. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you and goodbye.